What if Mowgli's story, that familiar tale of a boy raised by wolves in the Indian jungle, wasn't just fiction? It's a compelling thought, isn't it? A child, untamed, finding a place amongst animals. But as I've often found in my own journeys into the fringes of human experience, reality can be far stranger and often more unsettling than anything we might conjure up in a storybook. The truth is, history knows dozens of documented, and likely countless undocumented cases where children have survived not because of the structures of civilization but, in a peculiar and often heartbreaking way in spite of them, finding refuge or perhaps a different kind of existence in the natural world. These are not tales of romantic adventure, of boys swinging through trees with a carefree grin. The narratives of these so-called feral children are complex, often deeply troubling, and they force us to confront some uncomfortable questions about what it means to be human, what shapes us, and where the boundaries lie between ourselves and the animal kingdom. They challenge our very understanding of nurture, society, and the profound impact of early human connection, or the devastating lack thereof. It's a world that exists in the shadows of our own, a testament to an incredible, almost unbelievable resilience, but also a stark reminder of profound vulnerability. This is not a fairy tale, this is reality, one that is often more terrifying to imagine than to read. We're going to delve into some of these extraordinary and sometimes controversial accounts. We'll be looking at children who, through circumstances that are almost impossible to fully comprehend, found themselves living alongside, and in some cases, seemingly raised by animals. It's a journey into the unknown, a look at lives lived on the very edge of what we consider normal, and an attempt to understand what these stories tell us about ourselves. Our first story takes us to 1920s India, to a place called Midnapore. It's here that a missionary, Reverend Joseph Singh, reported a discovery that would capture global attention and, quite frankly, stretch the limits of belief. He claimed to have found two young girls, later named Kamala and Amala, living in a termite mound that had been repurposed, astonishingly, as a wolf den, alongside a wolf pack. The details he provided were vivid. The girls supposedly moved on all fours, lapped up water, ate raw meat, and exhibited behaviors that seemed to mirror those of their lupine companions. They were said to howl at night and shun human contact, their eyes apparently adapted to see in the dark. The attempt to reintroduce Kamala, the older of the two, Amala tragically died shortly after their rescue to human society was, by all accounts, a painstaking and largely heartbreaking process. She learned very few words, never fully walked upright with ease, and reportedly retained many of her wolf-like habits. There's an inherent sadness in this, a sense of a life caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. One can't help but wonder about the internal landscape of a child like Kamala. What were her thoughts, her perceptions? Did she yearn for the wildness she'd known, or was there a flicker of understanding, a desire for the human connection that was so alien to her? These are questions that, ultimately, remain unanswered, shrouded in the mystery of her unique and isolated upbringing. Fast forward to Ukraine in the 1990s and we encounter the story of Oksana Malaya. This is a case that feels particularly raw, perhaps because it's more recent, and the details of her neglect are starkly human in their origin. Oksana was reportedly left outside by her alcoholic parents as a very young child, perhaps around the age of 3. She sought warmth and companionship, it seems, in a dog kennel in their backyard, and for approximately 5 years dogs were her primary family. When authorities found her at the age of 8, she exhibited profoundly dog-like behaviors, barking, growling, sniffing her food before eating, and moving on all fours. The footage of Oksana from that time is quite startling. It's one thing to read about these behaviors, another entirely to see them manifest in a child. Her journey since then has been one of intensive therapy and rehabilitation. She has learned to speak, to walk upright, and to engage with humans, but the echoes of her early years remain. There's a certain guardedness, a way of moving, that hints at that profound early imprinting. Oksana's story forces us to consider the incredible adaptability of the human mind, but also the deep and lasting scars that can be left by extreme neglect and isolation. It makes one ponder, what does family truly mean when the only consistent presence is that of an animal? From the confines of a backyard kennel, we move to the sprawling, often unforgiving streets of Moscow in the mid-1990s. This is where we find the story of Ivan Mishukov. At the tender age of just 4, Ivan reportedly ran away from a home life that was, by all accounts, deeply troubled. He found himself alone on the streets, a terrifying prospect for any child, But Ivan didn't just survive, he, in a rather extraordinary turn of events, became part of, and eventually, a leader of, a pack of feral dogs. For 2 years, these animals were his protectors, his companions, his source of warmth and sustenance, as he shared scraps of food they scavenged. The authorities eventually located Ivan, but catching him proved difficult, precisely because the dogs were so fiercely protective of him. It's a remarkable image, isn't it? A small boy, not much more than a toddler, commanding the loyalty of a pack of street-hardened dogs. What's perhaps most striking about Ivan's story compared to some others is his reported ability to reintegrate into human society with relative success. He learned to speak again, attended school, and went on to live a seemingly more conventional life. It makes one wonder about the nature of his bond with those dogs. Was it a different kind of social structure? One that perhaps, in its own way, provided some of the elements of interaction that other feral children missed entirely? Now we journey to the dense jungles of Colombia, and to a story that sounds almost like something out of an adventure novel. Yet Marina Chapman insists it is her lived reality. Sometime in the 1950s, as a very young child, she estimates around 5 years old, Marina says she was kidnapped and then, inexplicably, abandoned deep in the rainforest. Alone and terrified, she claims she was eventually accepted, or at least tolerated, by a troop of capuchin monkeys. She describes learning to survive by observing them, what foods to eat, how to find water, even how to climb trees for safety. It's an astonishing account of interspecies learning and adaptation. Marina's narrative details a period of several years living this wild existence, mimicking the monkeys, foraging alongside them, until she was discovered by hunters. Her subsequent journey back into the human world was fraught with its own dangers and exploitation, including, she says, being sold to a brothel and living as a street urchin, before eventually finding a more stable life. The veracity of some details of her story has been questioned, as is often the case with such extraordinary claims emerging from the distant past. But whether every detail is precise or filtered through the lens of childhood trauma and memory, the core of her account speaks to an incredible resilience, and a profound, almost primal connection with the natural world that few could ever imagine. Our next story takes us to Uganda in the late 1980s, and the case of John Sabunya, sometimes referred to as the Ugandan monkey boy. John's early life was marked by profound trauma. After witnessing the murder of his parents, he fled into the jungle, a terrified child of perhaps 3 or 4 years old. It's here, he recounts, that he encountered a group of vervet monkeys. Rather than harming him, the monkeys, according to John and those who later observed him, seemed to accept him into their troop. He reportedly lived among them for several years, learning to forage for food like nuts and roots, and to climb trees with an agility that mirrored his primate companions. When John was discovered by villagers in 1991, he was described as having calloused knees from walking on all fours, and his communication was limited to monkey-like vocalizations and gestures. His rescue and rehabilitation is a rather remarkable tale in itself. He was placed in an orphanage where, with care and patience, he began to learn human language and behaviors. What's particularly striking about John's story is his apparent talent for singing. He later joined the Pearl of Africa Children's Choir and toured internationally. It's a powerful testament to the human capacity for healing and rediscovery, even after such an isolating and unusual upbringing. One wonders if those early years with the monkeys, however unconventional, provided some form of social interaction that aided his later development. From the jungles we travel to the stark, high-altitude environment of the Andes Mountains in Peru, and to the story of a boy known only as Daniel, sometimes referred to as the Andean goat boy. His case came to light in the 1990s. Daniel was reportedly found living among a herd of wild goats, having apparently been with them for a significant portion of his young life, perhaps as long as 8 years. Observers described him as moving with incredible agility on all fours, navigating the treacherous mountain terrain as adeptly as the goats themselves. He was said to communicate through bleating sounds, and to subsist on a diet of roots, berries, and reportedly goat's milk, sometimes suckling directly from the nannies. What makes Daniel's case particularly intriguing, and somewhat distinct from others, is the assertion by some who studied him that he exhibited fewer of the severe developmental delays seen in other feral children. While his social skills were understandably unrefined, and his language was that of the goats, there were claims that his cognitive abilities were not as profoundly impacted. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of the social environment provided by different animal groups. Could it be that the herd structure of goats, with its own set of social rules and interactions, provided a different, perhaps less isolating form of upbringing than, say, a more solitary existence or one with a smaller, more reclusive animal group? It's a speculative thought, of course, but one that highlights the complexity of these cases. Our final account is perhaps one of the most curious and also one surrounded by a considerable degree of skepticism: the story of the Egyptian ostrich boy. Reports surfaced in the early 2000s primarily through local media of a boy, possibly around 10 years old, who had been found living among a flock of ostriches in a remote desert area of Egypt. The details were sparse but evocative. He was said to run with incredible speed, mimicking the gait of the ostriches, to eat grass and other vegetation favored by the birds, and to communicate through hissing and other ostrich-like sounds. Some accounts even suggested he would bury his head in the sand, though this is a common misconception about ostrich behavior itself. Unlike many of the other cases we've discussed, which have, to varying degrees, been documented by researchers or caregivers over time, the ostrich boy's story remains largely anecdotal and unverified by more rigorous scientific or journalistic investigation. There are no widely available photographs or detailed case studies. This lack of concrete evidence has led many to question whether the story is an embellished local legend, a misunderstanding, or perhaps even a hoax, yet it persists in the annals of feral children lore, a tantalizing, if elusive, addition. It makes one ponder the power of such stories, how they capture our imagination, and why the idea of a child raised by such magnificent and distinctly non-mammalian creatures holds such a peculiar fascination, even if its factual basis remains uncertain. Looking back at these extraordinary and often deeply unsettling stories, it's difficult not to feel a profound mix of emotions. There's a sense of awe at the sheer resilience of these children, their ability to survive in circumstances that most of us can barely comprehend. But alongside that, there's an undeniable sadness, a recognition of the profound loss and trauma that underpin each narrative. Feral children are not savages, noble or otherwise. They are victims, not of the animals who, in some cases, may have offered a strange form of companionship, but often of people, of societal breakdown, of circumstances that led to them being turned away, betrayed, and forgotten by the human world. These accounts force us to confront uncomfortable questions about what truly defines us. Is it language? Is it societal structure? Is it the capacity for abstract thought? When a child is raised outside of these human constructs, what remains? And perhaps more pointedly, who in these stories was truly human? The child, adapting with an almost unimaginable tenacity to an alien world, or the societies and individuals who pushed them into that wilderness in the first place? It's a question that doesn't offer easy answers, but it's one that I believe is crucial to consider. Real-life Mowgli stories are not fairy tales. They're tragedies wrapped in wild wonder. They are stark reminders of the fragility of childhood and the profound shaping power of human connection, care, and community. They teach us not to judge from afar, not to sensationalize, but to look deeper, to try and understand the complex interplay of nature and nurture, and to perhaps reflect on our own responsibilities to the most vulnerable among us. These are not just tales of the wild, but reflections of our own humanity, or sometimes, the lack thereof.